Hello, everybody. My name's Steve Brazier. I'm the CEO of Canalis, and I have half an hour to entertain you regarding the incredibly complex things that are going on in the technology industry right now and the global economy. Many people are going through extraordinary suffering, and I'm going to talk to you about some of the disadvantages and negative consequences of the current situation. And then during the second half of the presentation, try and lift you up into a more optimistic scenario. I'm delighted APC have asked me to do this conference. Normally I would be spending April and May based out of our Singapore office, but today I'm trapped in my home in the UK. But I'm delighted I can join you virtually, but I'd much prefer to have a coffee or a glass of wine with you afterwards. Nobody knows exactly what the consequences of this COVID-related recession will be. Anyone who tells you exactly what's going to happen over the next 6 or 12 months, you shouldn't listen to them. As leaders of global enterprises, all we can do with our staff and our customers and our ecosystem is to talk to them honestly and transparently about the situation we see inside our business. There is no question the most brutal recession of our lives is coming over the next 3 to 6 months. There will be record levels of unemployment, record levels of GDP collapses, and they're already now being reported in China, in the US, and some other countries. The recession will have bigger consequences over the next 2 quarters than the virus has had over the last quarter. Everyone will be impacted. Although the technology industry will do better than most other sectors, we can't sell technology to companies and customers who go bankrupt. So who will go bankrupt? It will be those companies that have too much debt. It will also be those individuals that have too much debt, as we're already seeing play out in the oil industry in Singapore. And there will be tremendously negative consequences in terms of people suffering from depression, domestic abuse, substance abuse, divorce, suicide. And as time goes on, we're likely to see in some countries, as we saw in Hong Kong last year, a rise in protests, riots even, and also a rise in crime as people get more and more desperate. Parts of the technology industry have simply stopped over the last 2 or 3 weeks as offices have closed. No one's selling photocopiers anymore, and more importantly, no one's servicing those copiers or selling consumables for those copiers. That whole business has stopped. Likewise, if you're upgrading an office network, nobody needs that right now, and those businesses have been postponed. The network needs to be in the home, not the offices. There was being a big rise in smart office equipment. All of that has stopped. Retailers were going digital and installing a lot of contactless payment and point of sales equipment that was digital. That stopped. Anything to do with office maintenance, painting of offices, air conditioning systems, elevator repairs, all of that has stopped. And another market that's seen collateral damage from what's going on is the smartphone. Because as we've been mainly based at home, we're not mobile. We're using our mobile devices a bit less and our PCs and TVs a bit more. When we look at the economic perspective overall, some sectors of the economy have been absolutely devastated in an unprecedented way. Obviously, the retail environment has collapsed as most retail shops around the world close within 2 or 3 weeks of each other. There is simply no business happening on the high street right now. A few countries may start to open up soon, and we'll talk about that later in the presentation. The airline, the transportation industry, anything to do with tourism have been absolutely devastated. Almost every airline in the world will need some sort of government bailout to survive. Likewise, hotels are laying off their staff, furloughing their staff, simply business collapsed in a way that they could never have predicted. Restaurants too will see many of the chains go out of business and smaller family-owned businesses really fighting for their survival. The sporting industry, also live sports, stopped overnight, except for esports, of course, which have seen a mini boom. But professional sport and all the sponsorship and attendance that goes along with that simply stopped, as have business events, indeed events of any kind, including weddings, etc. So event planners are having a brutal time of it right now, except, of course, in events like ours, the new emergence of the virtual event that Schneider has moved so quickly to adopt. The oil and gas industry has collapsed. Prices of oil actually going negative in the US as they ran out of storage. And the price of oil and gas has collapsed simply because there's less transportation and less need for oil and gas. We are oversupplied. And of course, while we all suffer with our individual circumstances and try and readapt our businesses, I think we ought to have two thoughts. One is for anybody involved in the medical profession who have put their lives on their line in many cases to save other people's lives and taken untold risks and done very heroic things around the world. Let's always keep in mind that they're having a tougher time than we are. But also likewise, we are lucky to be in the technology, relatively prosperous sector. The people who are really suffering are the real poor, who again live hand to mouth, live on tips and whatever they may get, and most of that businesses has collapsed. In terms of big names, some predictions for you. Some of the former stars of the global press, for example, will go bankrupt. WeWork being number one on the top of that list, offering office rentals and short-term rentals in glamorous circumstances, but could never afford to pay their way, simply collapsing as a business. Others that may well collapse include Grab and Uber, who've seen their rate of adoption of their businesses collapse over the last few weeks, and they always had far too high costs. A lot of software engineers they used to run what was basically taxi companies. And likewise, Airbnb, devastated to many cities in terms of creating tourism, not collecting enough taxation, and Airbnb itself may now be in trouble. From the old world, one of the companies already fighting for survival is the Hertz car rental business. Obviously, nobody's traveling, nobody's renting cars. They've got too much debt, and any company with too much debt right now is very exposed. So I've talked to you about some of the negatives, but I also want to talk to you about many of the positives. Don't say it loudly, but many in the technology industry had a tremendous March and a tremendous April for their business. And that was particularly driven by the sudden rush to work from home. People suddenly had to equip their homes with big monitors, with new PCs, with mouses, with headsets, with webcams, and all the paraphernalia required to working at home. And companies who in that space have had a tremendous time. Probably the number one beneficiary of the recession in the technology industry is indeed Logitech, who's simply sold out of most of their high-end items. But the notebook PC industry has done well, as has parts of the software industry that enabled the remote working revolution. Office 365 has tremendous results. Inkjet printing, very strong. Ink in short supply all over the world. Collaboration software, obviously Zoom being the poster child of that, but other products like Cisco WebEx, Microsoft Teams also doing well. Virtual desktops, remote desktops, VPN services, everything to do with security, anything to do with home Wi-Fi has been incredibly strong. And as you start to think about the evolution of society and people, for example, going to a restaurant to collect a takeaway, not allowed in the store but waiting outside the store, some of those clever takeaway services have started offering Wi-Fi outside their premises to entertain people while they're waiting to collect their food. So there have been big successes for the technology industry through March, through April. The waves of adoption of technology as we move to remote working will start to come down now. Most people have been through their first phase of equipment adoption. The multinationals that rushed to remote working have deployed those desktops and notebooks now, and we'll start to see a decline in some of that as we move to more shaky economic circumstances in Q2 and as we move through to the summer months. And as we head into the summer months, while I've talked to you about the sectors of the industries that are doing badly, let's also recognize some sectors are doing fantastically well. Retailers may have suffered with their shops in the high streets and in the malls, but e-commerce is phenomenal. Companies like Amazon, of course, around the world, Alibaba, strongly growing out of China, and also a company called Shopify that enables others to deliver e-commerce solutions, are seeing their share prices at or above all-time highs. Another sector I think we'll all be delighted to see transformed is the healthcare sector. As people have become too nervous to go to visit their doctors or their hospitals because they're more scared of collecting a virus than whatever is impacting them at the current time, we've seen a growth around the world of telemedicine. And I think it will be a fantastic change for the doctors and their patients if we can do many of those meetings that used to happen in hospitals over remote video conferencing. Telemedicine will be a big beneficiary, reducing traffic, reducing parking charges, reducing congestion and infections in hospitals, and giving a better customer service. That is a clear evidence of win-win. We're also seeing doctors who work in, say, cancer detection, doing the scans and looking at the scans of mammograms, for example. We're seeing those doctors look at the scans from home, no longer traipse into the premises to do that. That is beneficial for all. So there's significant disruption, and that is creating opportunity. We've talked already about the rise of virtual events. I hope this one is a big success. And of course, everybody is learning how to collaborate by all the different video conferencing tools. That's not just the white collar worker. That's children who are doing remote learning from school over various virtual solutions. And it's also the elderly who are keeping in touch with their families. Everyone knows how to video conference now. And with this adoption of remote working, I'll come back to this point, we're also seeing a growth in cybersecurity and everything to do with securing all of these different new solutions. Another clear winner from the lockdown is the video streaming services, Amazon Prime, Apple TV, Disney TV, and of course the biggest of them all, Netflix. The end of the broadcast TV linear services is now upon us. This will be seen as a pivotal moment where they lost and streaming services became the norm. We are seeing a transformation of many different technology sectors that we can sell to. Many of those bring good news for all of us involved in the industry. And let's talk now specifically about the change that we've seen from remote working. 2 months ago, less than 10% of the white collar workforce worked from home. That transformed to nearly 100% in a matter of days and weeks. And that will lead to profound change. What is the point, for example, in having an office at all? Some companies will simply decide, smaller companies will simply decide they don't need them. Large companies will shrink the amount of office space they have. They'll realize they don't need everybody in every day. And as we start to see an end of the lockdown period and people start coming back to work, you watch how employees who've worked very successfully from home and maybe live far from the office and have a 1, 2, even 3 hour commute, look to them to say to their bosses, do you really need me boss? Do you really need me in the office anymore? Can't I stay at home? Or maybe can't I stay at home at least 3 days a week? I think as you start to look at those challenges, look for the roles that people play and segment their need to be in the office based on the roles. Salespeople, for example, you might try and really push to be in the office to get that culture, to get that buzz. But if someone's doing a finance job and is purely typing on a computer, do you really need them in the office very often? And schools, of course, have gone through a similar transformation. Some schools have done this very well, some have done it very badly. We've seen, for example, in Singapore, how they deployed Zoom, discovered Zoom wasn't very secure. Pornography started appearing in classroom lessons over Zoom, and they had to make another change to another platform. But schools have gone through this transformation, and some pupils are finding it more efficient to learn at home than indeed in the school, at least for some days a week. So maybe in the future, what we'll see is work at home, study at home, Fridays, where parents and children are all at home on the Friday. They can all coexist together and actually work very efficiently. What that problem won't solve is we don't want traffic, etc., just to disappear on a Friday. We need to find a new balance. And that's not a perfect idea, but it's along those lines that we'll start to find innovative solutions. And I think companies will have to work harder to get their employees to come to the office. I think you'll start to see emergence of new programs to encourage employees to the office. Fitness on Mondays, for example. Free lunches on Thursdays. Cinema nights on Wednesdays. Happy hours on Fridays. Let's see, but companies are going to have to work hard to attract people back to the office. Of course, not everyone has adapted well to working at home. There's been a rise in mental health issues, and the call on mental health services and employee access programs has been incredible. And of course, we'll only see the consequences of some of this over the weeks to come. So there are many positives from this work at home experience, but some negatives too. And we'll have to see how the new balance comes as offices start to open again. But things will certainly change. You will need to rewrite your work at home policy as of the beginning of June and decide what is acceptable and what is not. The next big prediction is that the remote working scenarios will have left some companies very insecure. We will see an acceleration of security breaches this year at an untold scale. Companies that rush to work at home simply won't have thought about the consequences of having all these home Wi-Fi networks and remote workers logging into precious systems. There will be attacks, there will be high-profile attacks, and there will be big scandals. We as a technology can help reduce the number of scandals by encouraging our customers, for example, to upgrade their notebooks and go to Windows 10, to deploy Office 365 and get off older, more insecure versions of Office, to deliver cybersecurity programs providing access control, intrusion prevention, endpoint management, data management, identity access. All of that needs to be in place in virtually every business, large and small. And to deliver managed workspaces in a particularly secure environment where it's clearly ring-fenced from somebody's private computers and private tools. There will be a record number of breaches this year. Any of you involved in selling security solutions should be doing extremely well. Now let's talk specifically about the challenges faced by the channel during these very complicated times. As I've tried to describe, we think parts of your business are doing very well, parts of your business are doing very badly. That depends on partly on the technology you're selling, copiers, office equipment, bad, remote working solutions, excellent. But it's also about which sectors you sell to. If you sell to an e-commerce company, you're probably experiencing record sales. If you sell to a physical retailer, not so much. So you're dealing with very different mixes of customers and performance of different portfolios. But the number one thing we hear from the cash flow and where you're looking for your vendors and your distributors to help is cash flow. Cash flow is your biggest challenge. Will your customers pay you? How quickly will they pay you? And if you've had a rush of business, for example, to supply the healthcare industry, to supply hospitals with all the technology they need, that's great, but often the healthcare sector pays slowly. And if we had a rush of business and you haven't managed to collect the cash, you can't fulfill the next run of business. So absolutely, cash flow is your number one priority. Your most important person inside your organization today is your CFO. Ask them about cash, not just once a week, not just once a month. Ask them about your cash situation every day. That is absolutely where the focus will be. And make sure you take advantage of the programs that are beginning to emerge from the vendors and distributors regarding examples of extended payment terms, for example. Some of those schemes are now available. We're also looking for the vendors to provide you with more support around accreditations, around training. You don't particularly want to fund a training course right now, but you have people at home who have the time to do training. So some of the more innovative vendors are offering those training schemes for free. Likewise, you don't want to spend your time in these extraordinary circumstances doing accreditation renewals. So again, we're encouraging all the vendors, like the airlines have, like the hotels have, to extend their frequent flyer, their accreditation programs, and so that anything expiring in 2020 is automatically renewed until 2021 in terms of a qualification period. That's a quick win-win for everybody. Some vendors have moved faster than the other. We encourage the whole industry to make that change. So number one priority for you is cash flow. Please focus on cash flow. The second thing is it will be very hard to win new customers at the moment. Why? Because it's difficult to meet them. Those chance acquaintances are unlikely to happen. It's difficult to build a trusting rapport with a new customer if you've never met them before and you can only do a video call. So your second big priority is to make sure you focus on customer retention. Make sure you're touching multiple points inside a customer and you're not just focused on winning the new business, but very much focusing on helping to maintain the existing business and to expand the uses of technology and the number of people using that technology. Microsoft, for example, has stumbled or cleverly planned, whichever word you want to use, on a brilliant solution regarding Teams. People were skeptical of Teams, found it difficult to use, slightly difficult interface, but suddenly many companies are totally dependent on Teams, and deploying that company-wide is a big win if you're selling Office 365 licenses. Likewise, now is a good time to innovate in how you retain your customers. Send them interesting information, send them funny videos, find ways to keep that rapport going in a remote examples. Maybe if you can offer them complimentary training services as well, that will be something that's useful, because they too will have dead time periods because they too are working at home. We are going to see a shift when people come back to work in offices of what we do with the sales force. Remember how sales forces are typically structured. You have your expensive, big suited outbound sales force, and then you have your cheaper, lower cost inbound sales force. That doesn't quite work anymore, does it? Because your expensive sales force is stuck at home, just like your inbound sales force is stuck at home. Who is more productive? Who is better value for you to keep? We expect to see those definitions of outbound versus inbound sales force merge over the coming months. Some of the more expensive salespeople who have got the nice cars, big expense accounts, they may be in less demand than they used to be. And those people who are skilled with digital tools can put together nice videos, provide nice content over social media or collaboration tools, will be in more demand. Those who are able to use these tools to build a rapport, that favors the young, obviously. So think about where you need to spend in terms of your sales force as they come back to work. We've got new tools, we can use them to be more efficient and in some cases to lower cost. So the number one challenge for the channel partners is cash flow. Number two is be all over your customers. Retain customers is going to be very hard to win new ones right now. And now let's talk about how the distributors can face the coming economic recession. Well, it's a remarkable time for distribution. They've done well over the last 20 years. It's a tough business. Margins are low, but margins have been eking up as some consolidation in the industry has happened. There's been a lot of interest and private equity involvement in distribution over the last years. But who would have thought we'd be in a circumstances where Ingram Micro, the world's largest distributor, is now controlled by H&A, which in itself is controlled by the Chinese state. Remarkable things are happening in this sector. We've shown you the 20-year performance of distribution, really to show how distribution could do well during a crisis. Yes, when the dot-com crisis happened and the financial recession happened, we saw declines in their revenues. That's true. But we saw only modest drops in their margins and modest losses. Distributors can adapt very quickly to declining revenues. And if one sector of the industry goes down, they normally find another that goes up to compensate. So while distributors too are under pressure for cash, and some of the vendors are starting to help them in terms of extending those payment terms, we're very confident that distribution will emerge from this crisis as essential as ever. Indeed, one of the things we've learned, I think, from the Amazon warehouses and from the issues regarding shipping health equipment around the world, the mask and the protective equipment, is actually we need the supply chain. The people who get stuff from A to B are more important than we realized. They're taken for granted when things go well, but when things don't go well, we really notice them. And actually, the people in the logistics centers from some of the distributors have been getting pay rises of late, well-deserved pay rises, in recognition of the essential services they provide, and good luck to them for all the hard work they do. Obviously, another winner from what's gone on in terms of remote working is the public cloud. We've seen tremendous results from Microsoft Azure, Amazon, AWS that continue to grow by leaps and bounds. More and more customers moving to the public cloud, and those customers on the public cloud increasing their capacity. No better example, of course, than Netflix, who I've already mentioned, who's had to ramp up their bandwidth in order to deliver more on-demand services they can probably ever have dreamed of. So the public cloud is another big winner. Those companies that kept their data locked and inaccessible inside a premise, they're gone. They're gone. That can't exist anymore. Will never exist again. They either have to enable full remote working from their own data centers and the hybrid cloud, or go to the public cloud. But as we move to the public cloud, we should notice, of course, the great job they've done in scalability. They have wobbled a bit in terms of providing the capacity. Both Microsoft and Amazon have struggled from time to time with outages, but by and large, they've delivered the scalability. But there are some customers who've noticed some things about moving to public cloud, particularly as they scale up, the costs go up in proportion, and it suddenly doesn't look cheap, it looks expensive. We're also hearing more and more concern that there's a fear of lock-in to the big three American public cloud providers, and some companies are nervous of that. And of course, as an industry, we've created a tremendous risk by putting so much of the world's computing resources into three big clouds. What happens if those clouds disappear for any reasons, whether it's security, financial, bad management, or whatever it may be? Sooner or later, an accident will happen and does happen, and the consequences could be almost as big as the recession that we're currently seeing if you bring the world's economy and clouds down in one place. So I think after this period of rushing to the public clouds and getting through to the crisis, you'll see more companies have a more sophisticated discussion about what they want on-premise and what they want on the cloud, how they manage cost and how they manage risk. But right now, obviously, providing public cloud services is the shortest term route to make a customer happy. Our industry touches every part of every industry now. Every industry is a software company. Every industry is a technology company. Whether you're a local butcher, greengrocer providing deliveries, suddenly taking online orders like you thought you never would before, or whether you're a cinema, try now moving to the streaming business of movies, etc. Every business has to have technology. And we have a responsibility now as an industry to think about all the good things we do and the bad things. One of the impacts of this recession and the virus is a change in the level of transportation. And with that comes some positive benefits. One is the reduction in pollution from cars and lorries not being used anywhere near as much, but also from the fact that factories have been closed, although they're now coming back on stream or have come back on stream in China, and China's got back to full speed pretty quickly. But the levels of pollution have dropped, and that's a good thing, and one we can all benefit from. Another side effect of what's gone on in the last 6 weeks is a reduction in car accidents on a large scale. 130,000 people die a month around the world in car accidents, and most of those accidents haven't happened in March and April, and hopefully won't in May too. There are things that cities can do to change the future, and we're starting to see a movement of cities really realizing, well, we've cut all the cars for the last 2 months into the city. Can't we keep that going? Why don't we put in much stronger restrictions, which if we'd announced a year ago, everyone would have protested about. But now we can do it. We can keep our cities car free, or much less cars than they used to be, which will also cut down on pollution and cut down on accidents. One of the consequences of the recession is governments did radical things. None of us could have predicted that we'd be forced into lockdown, that we wouldn't be able to go out of our houses for an hour or more a day, or even in some countries not allowed out at all. And yet the populations have accepted it because they understood the circumstances. So governments can do radical things. And as the next crisis may well be related to the climate, this is a historic opportunity for governments to rethink how societies work. And likewise, in the technology industry, one of the consequences of companies going bankrupt, which they certainly will in some sectors, is we'll see an emergence of the second-hand goods. So as channel partners, think about how you could benefit from that. And also, as we've got shortages of supply, both because of the slowdown in manufacturing that happened earlier in the year, and now a shortage of air freight, simply because planes aren't flying, the cost of air freight and availability of air freight's really collapsed. So there's a shortage of tech goods. So companies might buy second-hand goods, not because they're cheaper, but because they're the only thing that is available. Likewise, shifting some of those second-hand goods into poorer economies will be very lucrative business. So we can benefit in terms of building a more circular environment for our products. And also we should expect, as the climate becomes an ever bigger issue, more questions about where products are manufactured and how they're manufactured, and what the consequences of them being manufactured in the way they are. The reduction in transportation, as I talked about at the beginning of the presentation, has seen a reduction in the use of oil and the use of coal, the benefits there are to the environment. Schneider, of course, is a key in terms of delivering energy to the technology industry and many other industries. This is also a historical chance to really shift towards renewable energy, solar and wind in particular. And we're seeing that rise as a proportion of the world's energy consumption. And we really need to make a strong move to do that. You will see talk about bringing manufacture closer to home, particularly in the US. They'll be more and more concerned about supply chains that are dependent on China. Certainly while Trump stays in power, there will be some pressure on American companies. There already was before this crisis, and that will continue to bring manufacturing back home. We think for the technology industry that's unlikely. People won't pay 5 or 10% more for a computer or a storage device or a networking device because it's made in America when they're in America. We think that's unlikely. But some other sectors will see the emergence of local grown manufacturing, particularly in the vaccine space, healthcare, protective clothing. Some of those things countries will now realize they need to keep local. Maybe also a bigger discussion about where food comes from. So we're moving into a new society. I want to finish on a positive slide. We've talked about the environment. We're hearing the birds sing more than we've ever done before. We're seeing more insects arrive on our plates and on our outdoor terraces. There is a transformation going on. Governments can be fast and radical. They need to provide more funding for healthcare, and a lot of that funding needs to go into technology. They also need to think about their taxation systems. Retailers simply will not recover if there isn't a change in taxation. We need to move taxation away from taxation on property and taxation on shops, probably to a system that taxes deliveries, because deliveries are high pollution and it's an easy thing to measure, and it would be easy to tax $1, €1, whatever it is per delivery. We need to change the rigid 5-day-a-week concept and break it up to allow more flexible working and more flexible studying, to allow families more time together, work at home days, etc. China is now coming back to normal. Thailand is opening up next week. The number of virus cases in both South Korea and Taiwan is virtually zero. We're looking forward to a new era as we go into the next months. And let's hope that we take some positives out of this and deliver some fundamental change in the technology industry, the way industries are run, that can benefit all of us. I hope you'd enjoyed that presentation. There's more information from Canalys available to channel partners free of charge on our channel partner community called candafero.com. Go there, register. You can download lots of data, more videos and presentations. Thank you very much for your time today. And thank you to Schneider for the opportunity to present here.